thought I knew her better than anyone. But as soon as we met, she turned away, cried, and left me alone in a city thousands of kilometers from my home. I met Jamie through a Discord server for gamers, one of those late-night spaces where strangers from all over the world gather to laugh, argue, and build something out of shared obsessions, and from the moment we started talking, it felt like we had known each other for years. We went from casual jokes and public chats to long private conversations that stretched into early mornings, covering everything from our favorite movies and obscure bands to our dreams and career goals. She worked in the tech industry and spoke about her job with this infectious energy, a kind of raw passion that made even the most complex things sound exciting. I was drawn to that, her drive, her confidence, the way her mind worked so fast and with so much intensity that I found myself trying to keep up just to stay close to her orbit. There was something electric about it, something real, and even though we had never met in person, I started to feel like I knew her in a way I hadn't known anyone in a long time. Daily calls quickly became our routine, and soon they were the highlight of my day. We would spend hours on video calls talking about everything and nothing, laughing over inside jokes and planning what we would do if we ever met in person. Sometimes we would talk so late into the night that we'd fall asleep with the cameras still on, both of us exhausted but unwilling to hang up. After a few months, Jamie started calling me her boyfriend. It felt natural, even though we hadn't physically met yet, but deep down, I couldn't help but feel that there was something important we were missing by staying in this virtual space. I didn't mind her calling me that, but part of me thought that we should meet face to face before anything became official, before I truly let myself believe in what we were building. I knew the chemistry between us was real, but I needed to see if it would translate into something tangible, something beyond the pixels on a screen. We eventually made a plan for me to travel to her, since she lived in Toronto and I was based in Minneapolis, and even though I had hoped she might come to me first, I understood when she explained that she struggled with anxiety and had ongoing health issues that made traveling difficult. I wanted to meet her more than I wanted to hold on to any expectations, so I started saving every extra dollar I could, cutting back on small luxuries and taking extra shifts where possible. After a couple of months, I finally raised enough money to make the trip happen. I bought the plane tickets, booked a hotel near her apartment, and covered all the expenses myself because I believed this meeting was worth it. I had imagined the moment so many times, what it would feel like to finally be in the same room, to see her smile without a screen between us, to make something real out of everything we had been building for months. When I arrived in Toronto, exhausted but buzzing with nervous excitement, I sent Jamie a message to let her know I had landed and checked into the hotel. Her responses were brief and distant, nothing like the warm, eager energy I had come to expect from her, and I tried not to read too much into it. After a few minutes of silence, she finally texted that she was having a panic attack and needed a little more time before she could come meet me. I sat in the hotel room trying to stay calm, telling myself that this was just her anxiety and not a reflection of anything deeper, though part of me couldn't help but feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down. 2 hours passed slowly, and just when I had begun to wonder if she would come at all, I heard a knock. I opened the door to find her standing there in the lobby, visibly shaking, her eyes red and full of tears. She was crying and apologizing all at once, her whole body trembling like she was bracing for some kind of impact, and in that moment all I could do was hold her and tell her it was okay, even though I didn't quite know if it really was. We went up to my room in silence, her shoulders tense and her face still wet from crying, and as soon as we stepped inside, she sat on the edge of the bed and broke down again. For 10 long minutes, she didn't say a word, just sat there with her head in her hands, sobbing softly while I sat beside her, unsure of what to do or say that wouldn't make it worse. I handed her a glass of water from the nightstand and gently told her to breathe, trying to steady my own nerves while comforting hers. Eventually, the tears slowed and she began to talk, her voice quiet and cracked, offering fragments of explanations I could barely piece together. After a few more minutes of silence, she wiped her face, looked at me with an apologetic kind of fragility, and said that maybe we should go to her house. She wanted me to meet her brother. It felt sudden, but I nodded, hoping that the familiarity of home might help her relax, and that maybe finally, this visit would begin to feel like something closer to what we had both imagined. Her house was surprisingly cozy, filled with soft lighting, mismatched furniture, and little personal touches that made it feel warm and lived in. And when we walked in, I could see a slight shift in Jamie, her shoulders dropped just a little, and for the first time since I arrived, she wasn't crying. Her brother Alex greeted me at the door with an easy smile and a calm presence that made the whole space feel a little more grounded. We sat together in the living room talking about small things, movies we liked, where I was from, the weather, and though the conversation never went deep, it was enough to feel like maybe things were settling. Jamie laughed once or twice, nothing loud or lasting, but enough to give me hope. Still, it didn't last long. After about an hour, she said she was too exhausted to do anything else and that she needed to rest. Before I could even suggest walking back with her or staying a little longer, she was already on her phone calling me an Uber back to the hotel. I nodded, smiled, and said goodbye, even though I didn't quite know what to make of any of it. The next day, I found myself sitting in the hotel room again, the hours creeping by as I stared at my phone, waiting for a message that didn't come. I kept telling myself to be patient, to understand, to remember what she had told me about her anxiety, but as the morning turned into early afternoon, the silence started to feel heavier than empathy could excuse. Finally, she messaged me, her tone once again clipped and distant, apologizing and saying she was overwhelmed and not in a good headspace. I tried to be supportive, suggested I could at least pick up lunch and bring it to her place so we could eat together, no pressure, just something simple. She agreed at first, said it might be nice, and for a moment I felt a flicker of hope. But by the time I messaged her that I was heading out to grab the food, she responded that she wasn't hungry after all. I sat back on the hotel bed, staring at the screen, unsure whether to feel concerned or foolish, wondering how something that had once felt so easy had become this quiet and one-sided. Then, out of nowhere, Jamie messaged me in the early evening to say that we were going to a party with her brother at a friend's house. I was surprised, considering how quiet and withdrawn she had been just hours earlier, but I agreed without hesitation, thinking maybe being around people she trusted would help her feel more at ease. When we arrived, the atmosphere was relaxed, filled with warm lighting, quiet music, and a group of people who already seemed to know who I was. Her friends were welcoming, genuinely kind, and seemed excited to finally meet me in person after hearing about me for so long. I appreciated their energy and tried to engage, but throughout the night, Jamie and I barely spoke. She floated between conversations, laughing occasionally and sticking close to her brother, while I stood on the sidelines, unsure of how to insert myself without feeling like I was imposing. It was strange, being surrounded by people who treated me like I belonged, while the one person I had come all this way for felt more distant than ever. After the party ended, Jamie quietly asked her brother to drive me back to the hotel, avoiding my eyes as if even that small conversation was too much. The car ride was silent, thick with everything none of us were saying, and I sat in the passenger seat staring out at the unfamiliar streets, feeling like an afterthought, like I had become completely unnecessary in a story I had once believed I was central to. When we pulled up to the hotel, she finally turned to me, her voice low and brittle, and said that her anxiety had gotten worse again and that she was really sorry. I nodded and said I understood, because what else could I say in that moment, when everything I was feeling was too heavy, too tangled to say out loud? But inside I was seething, not just with frustration or disappointment, but with the quiet, aching grief of someone who had traveled miles for something that was slipping further away with every step. On the third day, after hours of pacing around the hotel room and replaying every moment since I arrived, I decided I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine, so I sat down and wrote Jamie a message that was as honest as I could make it without sounding angry. I told her I was hurt, that I felt dismissed and unimportant, and that it was incredibly painful to fly all this way to see her only to end up alone in a city I didn't know, waiting for scraps of her time and presence. I said I understood that she struggled with anxiety, but I needed her to know that I had come with hope and effort, and it felt like neither had been met. She replied with a long message, filled with apologies and emotional confessions I hadn't expected. She said she was afraid of intimacy, that being close in real life made her feel exposed and vulnerable in ways she didn't know how to handle, and that deep down she was battling an intense insecurity that told her I might stop liking her the moment I saw the full picture. Her words were heavy, sincere, and heartbreaking, and for the first time I realized this wasn't just avoidance or indifference, it was fear. Real, paralyzing fear that had built a wall between us long before I ever boarded that plane. We met in the afternoon, both of us a little quieter, a little more careful, as if the message exchange had opened something fragile between us that neither of us wanted to damage. We ended up sitting on her couch, watching a TV show we had often joked about online, and for the first time since I arrived, the atmosphere felt more or less natural. We laughed at the same parts, made side comments like we used to on video calls, and there was a rhythm between us that almost felt familiar again. At one point, as we sat there shoulder to shoulder, she reached out and lightly touched my hand, her fingers brushing mine like it took all her courage just to make contact. It was a small gesture, almost nothing on the surface, but it felt like everything in that moment. It was a tiny but important step, a signal that maybe she was trying to meet me halfway, even if it wasn't perfect, even if it had taken days to get there. And for the first time since landing, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe we weren't as far apart as I had feared. In the evening, we went out to dinner with her mom, and for the first time, the tension that had shadowed our days seemed to lift. Her mom was kind and welcoming, the kind of person who radiated warmth without trying too hard, and she asked thoughtful questions about my life, my work, and my family in a way that made me feel seen and genuinely appreciated. There was no awkwardness, no subtle undercurrent of judgment, just an honest, easy conversation over shared food and soft lighting. I noticed that Jamie seemed more relaxed around her, more present, and by the end of the meal, there was a softness in her expression that I hadn't seen before. As we walked back to the car, she slipped her hand into mine without saying a word, and I held on to it, letting the quiet connection speak louder than anything else. After dinner, she seemed much calmer, like something inside her had settled, even if only for the night. When we returned to her house, the night still warm and quiet, we settled back onto the couch and talked for a while longer, watching part of a movie that neither of us really paid attention to. The conversation came more easily now, with fewer pauses, less second-guessing, as if the past few days had finally worn down whatever walls were still standing between us. After the movie, she stood up and offered to drive me back to the hotel, and I said yes without hesitation, grateful for the gesture, for the progress it represented. As we drove through the dim, empty streets, something shifted between us, and for the first time, we began to talk seriously about what it would actually take to make this work. Not just the long-distance logistics but the emotional part too. She admitted she needed patience, reassurance, and time to grow into herself outside the comfort of a screen. I told her I needed honesty, presence, and the feeling that I wasn't walking this road alone. It wasn't a dramatic breakthrough or a romantic movie moment, but it was honest, raw, and real, and that, more than anything else, made me feel like maybe there was still something worth holding on to. She came up to the room with me, her steps quiet, almost hesitant, as if part of her still wasn't sure how far she could let herself go, but she helped me gather my things for the early flight, folding clothes with careful hands and asking if I needed anything packed last minute. We didn't say much. There wasn't a need to, because everything that had been tense and complicated just days before now hung between us in a gentler silence. And then, just before she turned to leave, she stepped closer, her eyes meeting mine for a moment that felt like the longest pause in the world, and we kissed. It wasn't passionate or rehearsed or cinematic. It was quiet, sincere, the kind of kiss that says everything without asking for more. It was the moment I had been waiting for since I stepped off the plane, not because it solved everything but because it felt real. Finally, after all the awkward starts and hesitant steps, we had found a space where we met not as projections or expectations, but simply as ourselves. Since my departure, we've been in daily contact, not just the surface-level check-ins but real conversations, about how we're feeling, what we're afraid of, and what we both want from this fragile thing we've started to build. Jamie promised to begin working on her anxiety with a therapist, and for the first time, I felt like she wasn't just apologizing but actively trying to take responsibility for the distance that had grown between us. We talked about the summer and the possibility of her flying to see me, and we both acknowledged that if she's able to do it, if she can take that step, it will be a real test of where our relationship stands. It won't fix everything, but it will show whether we're both willing to meet each other not just halfway, but fully and honestly. And even after all the confusion and disappointment, after the questions I still don't have answers to, I find myself believing it makes sense. Believing that what we have is messy and imperfect but still worth the effort.